And now I work on Cortana for Windows back in London. I can't say too much about this because it's a tentative project, but slowly more information is being released in the news if you're interested. I can say though that I'm really excited about the direction of the project, as well as like the future of virtual assistants. But to really get into all of those jobs, obviously I needed to pass a technical interview. And so now the tips I'm going to share with you, I learned from my own experiences interviewing as well as from Microsoft engineering leads. I've found that there's really about 4 stages or topics that you come across regularly in a technical interview. And so these are your team fit, your software engineering principles, your sort of algorithms, data structure, and problem solving questions, as well as potentially like a group assessment or a group collaboration project. So we'll start with team fit. So now team fit is obviously sort of helping evaluate whether or not that you're going to fit into the team dynamic or culture. It's really important for your company to judge whether or not that you kind of fit into this team dynamic, given just how much time you spend with your colleagues. But it's also really important for you to see how well you fit in this team. For part of this section, you can really kind of just have to be yourself and try to read the room. There's not really much of a point faking it because as soon as you get in the job, you're going to find all of this stuff out anyway. But for the other aspect of it is these behavioral and competency-based questions. And so you'll come across these in loads of interviews, not technical, non-technical. And these are kind of questions like, tell me about like the hardest project that you've worked on and tell me why, or tell me about a time that you've worked in a team to deliver a project to a deadline. And because of how often these types of questions come up, I found that it's really good to kind of come up with these like sample responses to some of these questions. So for me, I focus on a couple different areas. So I do adaptability, teamwork, effective communication, creative problem solving, self-motivation and drive, as well as client focus. And so it really helps me having these sort of things I can fall back onto and these experiences I can fall back onto, so that in the moment I can kind of clearly articulate my message and make sure that I'm hitting all of the key points. Next is these software engineering principles. So these tend to be about trying to figure out if you're like generally just sort of understand what software engineering is all about, and maybe potentially also focusing on a particular language. A lot of these are actually derived from the things that you put on your CV as topics that you know, and so it's really important that you know the topics that you put on your CV. If that means sort of refining it by taking things out, it could be worth it because you don't really want to be called out on something that you've highlighted that you're good at. These types of questions tend to be sort of small to medium sized, and so you'll often be asked them to be like either just like verbal or potentially also like whiteboard questions. Some of the good like resources that I've used before is like the site HackerRank as well as the book Cracking the Coding Interview. So it's good to kind of just like work through some of these and get your mind in the right point. As well as software engineering is obviously not just about programming and writing code. So there's also probably going to be some of these like non-technical questions. So it's worth brushing up on things like documentation, engineering life cycles, even like work progress sort of tracking methods like Kanban and Scrum, handling edge cases, things like that, just so you can kind of demonstrate that you can work in a professional environment and with a team. Some of you may have heard of the STAR technique, so I always use this when I'm answering these behavioral and competency-based questions, or potentially some about my CV and past experience. Really what it is just essentially like a response formula that, again, kind of makes sure that you're building this narrative while keeping your answers succinct. So it covers the situation, task, action, and result. So situation is all about sort of setting the context and the background of the situation, like what is the challenge that you're solving or what kind of project are you trying to deliver. Task is really about what's needed of you, so like what kinds of like things are required of you to deliver it, like what kind of KPIs or things like your success metrics that you're trying to reach. Action is what you actually did, how did you accomplish what you were looking to, and what kinds of things did you focus on during delivering this project. I know I've had this before where sometimes when I'm talking about an example of when I've worked in a group, I'll say that we did this or we focused on these things, but this interview is really about you, so try to make sure that you're saying things like, I delivered this feature, or I led this team, or I prioritized these tasks like this, because it's became about you and not about the rest of your group. As well as then you finally wrap it all up with your results, and so this is actually where you say what was delivered, how well it was delivered, how did you meet your success metrics. This is where you're really trying to demonstrate your capabilities and answering the question that they've asked of you. I first started this technique when I was in university and used it all throughout my interviews. And actually at Xbox, I also saw this as the recommended response method for candidates in the Xbox hiring guide. So it's a pretty tried and tested technique, and there's a lot of buy-in from both like academia and in industry. Now, this is where the bulk of your technical interview is. This is where I have the hardest challenges. So it's your algorithms, data structures, and problem-solving questions. So for these, some of these questions might be harder depending on if you did well in your previous questions. For the algorithms questions, they tend to kind of focus, or at least I've noticed, they tend to focus on kind of common algorithms that you would learn in maybe like a computer science class or in a CS book, but usually with a bit of a twist. They're not going to let you get off that easy. But places you sort of focus is like searching and sorting and reversing. And so if you kind of understand the fundamentals and how they work, then you're able to sort of expand those into these questions that they're going to ask you in this section. The data structures one, again, the things I tend to see come up time and time again is implement this built-in data structure by hand. It seems to usually be linked lists as well because they're pretty flexible and there's lots of things that you can do with them. It's useful to know as well like the strengths and weaknesses of different types of data structures and when you might use one versus the other. Like, these are kind of common things and easy things that you can study in your own time, but when you actually get to the moment and you have this top of hand and like you kind of just like focus on answering the next stage of the challenge. As well as then, so for problem-solving questions, I found that they tend to combine both like algorithms and data structures, as well as again a bit of like creative thinking. These kinds of things, like something like maybe like the knapsack problem, if you heard of it, implementing the Fibonacci sequence, things like that. This is when you kind of go back to the hacker rank and cracking the coding interview and look through some of the examples that they have there. Because some employers even just literally take questions from those books and place them in front of you, and so you might have the upper hand. So these are the kinds of questions that are a bit more challenging, but I always say that when you're answering them, the first thing you should do is really sort of ask these clarifying questions and make sure that you are like removing all assumptions from the answer. So like this is almost like your requirements gathering stage. While you're answering the questions, it's good to, or you basically have to sort of explain your thinking the entire time. It's almost like a math test where you write down your workings so you can almost get points for all the other things in case you get the answer wrong. Like they'll be able to see where maybe you've thought something slightly different or you've gotten something wrong, so they can kind of guide you in the right place because they want you to get the answer at the end of the day. And if they see you getting stuck a lot of the time, they'll give you hints, and so take these hints, because again, they're trying to make sure you get to the answer and see how well you're responding to this advice and responding to this feedback. So they're there to really try to help you at the end of the day. And finally, you might also have a group assessment. These I tend to find are more for like interns or like placements or graduate schemes. And they're really trying to see how well you work in a team, how well you collaborate. Things you should really be focusing on is making sure that you're explaining your motivations for why you're suggesting something, working with others to find compromise if your ideas don't match up. Things like making sure that you don't railroad the conversation if you have loads of ideas, and potentially instead involving and including quieter members that are in your group, because it really starts to show that you have more of a self-awareness of your team, as well as you're promoting sort of more inclusive behaviors, because those people have good ideas, they just might not feel quite as comfortable speaking in front of a group, and so it's almost a good way for you to sort of promote yourself as someone who is a bit of a leader and being like aware of what the group is like. So that's really my main sort of technical interview tips. Again, for some of these, you kind of just have to go away and start working through the problems and building up your experience with answering these types of things. But hopefully that section kind of helped point out some key things that you can do to sort of bring your technical interview up to that next level. So now that you've gotten the job, really you're going to want to try to hit the ground running. I say these are early in career tips, but personally I think they can be relevant at all levels. So the first one is to seek communities outside of your day job. I find that communities are really important that combine like multiple skills and interests because it makes you feel like a more fulfilled and happy person when you have something else in your life to sort of be pushing towards and improving and working for. I've learned, especially with my experience with the women in tech community, that finding these communities that intersect with your career are a really good way of unlocking these networks that are united by these shared interests and shared passions that you can kind of start to tap into to sort of accelerate your career or altruistic goals. This is one of the best pieces of advice that I've been given. Basically, I was told to find where there are gaps in my team and to fill it, to make it my USP. It's really about a good way to kind of push yourself to learn something new while also becoming a really invaluable member of your team. And what's even better yet is if you can kind of pull on some of the experiences of your other team members to kind of accelerate your learnings and enhance them so you can kind of build off the foundation that they may have and take it somewhere further. This kind of USP expertise is a really good way of kind of building respect in your team, as well as being able to like start creating these career growth opportunities for yourself because it's very obvious where you're making your impact on your team. Finally, don't be afraid to ask questions. I know it can be really intimidating joining a new team or working with new people, but the kind of the best way to sort of give your company that return on investment and to get up to speed and start making all of that impact is by asking questions to your team. They obviously have learned loads of things, and so don't reinvent the wheel, ask them for help, learn from them, and learn what the best practices are on this team. I used to be pretty intimidated by this or feel like a little bit of an imposter, but there's a couple things that sort of helped shift my mindset a little bit. One of which was I realized that pretty much everyone on my team is being judged on like for their performance evaluations on how much they've helped other people on their team learn and grow. And so by asking questions, I was helping them by helping myself. The other thing is this quote, I'm not sure if you can all read it, but it basically says like, he who asks a question is a fool for 5 minutes. He who does not ask a question remains a fool forever. And it kind of just stuck with me over the years because it makes you kind of realize that even the smartest people in the room, even the experts have once stood in your shoes, have had to ask the exact same questions, learn the exact same things. So again, pulling on that experience, it's just gonna help you get to their level that much faster. And so I cover some of these and more in this Medium article that I wrote. It's definitely worth a read, I personally think. And that's me. Feel free to get in touch. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and I have my website as well. So thank you.